The anticipation, the excitement. We are back after a month-long break that felt like a year. The July break is done. It's much like Congress August break.
July.
Nothing. Oh my gosh, I've had the worst anxiety. Mara Carabello with the Accero Group, just in case you forgot who she was in the month break, is gone. Greg Hughes, we'll get to that in a minute, is now a full-time radio man, no longer allowed to play with us. So we only hang out with house speakers. So we got Mike Schultz in here today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Heidi Hatch with KUTV 2 News. Just a quick review. So after the July break, it's been less than 4 weeks. I think 3 weeks and 5 days since the assassination attempt at the Trump rally that was in Butler, Pennsylvania. 1 person dead, 2 seriously injured. Trump obviously escaping with his life, grazed by a bullet. The RNC, that feels like 2 years ago. It was oddly energized, though, in a way that I don't think I've remembered in years. The high-pressure campaign to get Biden to step down, it worked. VP Harris is now the nominee. We now know that Minnesota Governor Walz is going to be the man. He's backed by Bernie Sanders. The stock market, as we know, has been jittery. A crash, a little bit of a reprieve, and now we're wondering what happens next. Oh, and Israel and Iran, they might go into World War III. So just a few things have happened. Yeah. Glad you're all with us. We're going to try to get through these issues because I know that we like to look at the Utah way of looking at it and the different ideas, and there's been a lot said about all these issues, but we've had some time to marinate, think about them. One thing I want to get to before we get to the elections, though, is here in Utah, we had our 8th execution since 1976. It happened on Wednesday. Taberon Honey was put to death. And it was a long night for the media. I'm still trying to get my brain back around. We were on the air. Most people were not watching till 3 a.m. And our House Speaker, Mr. Schultz, was there. Yeah. Let's start with you on this. Yeah. Did you choose to go? Were you told to go? Is this part of the job?
Well, I had a choice in it. Anybody that participates in that has a choice. But I was asked to go and be one of the witnesses. And initially my gut reaction was no, I didn't need to be part of that. And so, but I says, let me think about it for just a minute. So as I started to think about it, I mean, it's no secret, I'm a strong supporter of the death penalty. And given my position and the fact that the legislature makes a lot of decisions around the death penalty, I thought, you know what? It probably would be a good idea for me to go and be part of it and understand it, to have that experience and understand what that process looks like. So that's why I chose to go when asked, and I'm glad I did. It's not something I need to go do again, but now I understand it, I'm glad that I went.
Do you have any takeaways? I don't want to say, are you glad that you went, because nobody was glad that they were there. Right. But was there anything specifically that you took from it that you didn't realize that you would take before leaving?
Yeah, the main takeaway I had walking away from that was what an outstanding job corrections did with it. Very respectful to all sides, the victims' side, the Honey's family, all sides, and even to Honey himself. They did a really good job. Corrections did a great job following state law. You know, there was a hard time. We had a really hard time getting the drug itself. In fact, we didn't know if we were going to be able to get it. And state law says
the pentobarbital.
Yeah, yep. And state law says that if we can't get the drugs, then you have to go by firing squad. And so corrections could have easily, it was that hard to get the drug. Corrections could have easily just thrown their hands in the air and said, we're going to go with firing squad. But no, they took the extra time, really worked through it, took some went out and was able to acquire the drug. And I'm glad they did. It was quick. It went quickly. I think from the time they opened the curtain to the time the curtains closed was 17 minutes.
I did not witness it. I was there reporting all night long and was outside, so I was thankful I didn't have to see that. But everyone who was there said that it was, I guess, as easy as possible. Honey, I think they said all day long, was gracious, that he went willing and knew that this was something that had to be done. Mara, this is something that's been argued on Utah's Capitol Hill back and forth. I think the last time we saw this was in 2020 and 2021. It's obviously emotional on both sides. There are people who are saying that 10 years from now, this won't exist anymore. There will no longer be a Utah death row. Do you think we're heading that direction, or will this still be something that we continue as part of state law here in Utah?
I mean, I think it's always going to be a conversation because it's been a conversation with humanity since the beginning of time, right? We've had public hangings, public killings for as long as we've gotten together as a society. So it'll go back and forth. I think most of the polling shows that the majority of Americans and Utahns are leaning towards no death penalty. I mean, that seems to be the trend of legislation. But as Mike said, Utah, particularly Utah State Legislature, has always held really strong to being pro death penalty. And this one, I agree. I mean, what I really respect is Mike's explanation of why he went. I'm not in favor of the death penalty. I don't think it's an effective law enforcement tool. I don't think that...
you don't think it's a deterrent when somebody goes to murder
we know
someone?
It's not a deterrent, right? And so then the question, I mean, I'm sort of not for state-sponsored killing, but I also... I agree with Mike that this was handled well. The process and law enforcement treats it with respect. I also appreciated what Honey had to say. I mean, I understand to the person that he was, and I'm good friends with actually the man who prosecuted him. And so the seriousness of the crime is not to be overlooked. But I really appreciate that he pointed out what I strongly believe, and that people change, and that we should have the power in that. I don't think people who have committed crimes like this should ever be released, but I just think it's not a deterrent and it's not effective. I'll also say I'd be interested in Mike. I have never witnessed a death penalty event, but I have been in the chambers where the in the old prison. I took a tour. It's a heavy place. Like you do not have to be told where you're going. Yeah. It feels as dark and as heavy as a place can feel. It's really interesting to me that I was so struck by the feeling of the room.
Yeah. Just walking into it.
Yeah.
You certainly feel what it's about and why, and you did. But I want to just say, you brought it up a little bit about, maybe it was you, Maura, what Honey said, his last words.
Yeah.
I was really impressed by what he said, and he spoke to his friends, his brothers and sisters, as he referred to them in the prison, that are trying to change. He said, "Don't give up hope. Keep trying to change." I thought that was really impressive for someone that knew what was about to happen to him within minutes, that he was going to be put to death. For him to think of others and give a message of, I was just really impressed by that.
I was more impressed by the humanity of all of it, which, if that's possible, because I'd read a lot about the case. It happened when I had just barely left Cedar City, where I was going to SUU not long afterwards when I went to my first job. And, I mean, it was a brutal, graphic, awful crime. And I had all that in my head when I went there. But seeing how he was treating others and how he spoke, and it seemed like he was a changed man, and just the humanity from all sides, the way that the state was dealing with it and him, I was impressed by all of it. And so I do think that, it sounded like he was someone who had changed for the better, which I guess is good. We call it the Utah State Prison, but it's a Utah State Correctional Facility, and it seems like there had been correction over the years. So
I think it's a great example to others in that facility, in the corrections facility. Hopefully there's people paying attention to that.
Yeah, but I do hope legislators listen to the fact that most people are not supporting the death penalty.
I have a feeling the conversation may come up again next year. There's belief that even though we've only had 8 cases since 1976, that our next one will come quickly, possibly as soon as February, when the appeals process runs out for Menzies, and that would be a firing squad case. And so I believe it will probably bring it to the forefront again, where we start to have the conversation. So we will look forward to talking that more out later. But right now we have so much to talk about this last month. 87 days, if you can believe it, until the November election. And when you think about it, the November election's technically 3 weeks before that, because the ballots are sent out before then. So we're 2 months out from the election. And there's so many questions still as to what's happening from the primaries here in Utah to what's going to happen on the presidential ballot. So first off, Malloy wins after the recount, Utah CD2. This is just from last week. So it started at a 214 vote difference, now 176. There were some technical issues along the way with the recount that we think we figured out. And now we had a Utah Supreme Court case this morning with Colby Jenkins. Just because it's freshest right now, Mara, Colby Jenkins, his case was heard by the Supreme Court today. He's arguing that I think just over 1,000 ballots from St. George were mailed to Las Vegas first, not post-stamped in time, and should be counted. Does he have an argument, or do people just need to follow the directions on the envelope and get it in sooner?
Well, I mean, the Lieutenant Governor's office has clearly said follow the directions, and we have state law, and this election adhered to state law. Another thing that I think is going to be really interesting to see if the state Supreme Court opines upon it is, remember, he first appealed to the federal court. Mm-hmm. And the reason that that's important is that we're talking about a federal election. We're not talking about a state election, and there's a huge differentiation there. And so
it's managed by the local government, but it's a
managed,
federal election.
But if he were running for governor, if he were running for a House seat, it would be completely controlled by state law. He's running for Congress, and that's controlled by the federal government, and the federal courts have already pretty expeditiously said thanks, no thanks on his appeals. And so he has moved to the state court. I suspect that they'll be pretty quick.
They decided this morning.
Oh, they have? Yep. And I'm assuming they kicked it because there was no merit. And now I really appreciate...
I thought they hadn't ruled on it, that they were sounding like they weren't going to support it, but there was no ruling. Did I get confused?
My understanding is the Supreme Court came out this morning and ruled on it and put an end to it, yes.
Yeah, and I mean, I am sympathetic to, I have long said, I think if I were in this position, I would rather lose by a lot than a little. Yeah. Like, I lost a ballot election one time by 5 votes, and I still get a tick because, like, I can count to 5, and I'm thinking I know exactly who didn't vote. I think I would rather I don't know if I want to get shellacked, but I would rather lose by several thousand. I think it's got to be really frustrating. I will also just say one thing that's sort of bugging, so I'll share it, is we keep phrasing it like they sent these to Las Vegas. We did, but let's remember that Las Vegas is like an hour and a half, 2 hours away from St. George. So it would actually be longer had they sent them to Salt Lake. I feel like the phrase they sent them to Vegas makes it sound like we sent them to the Ozarks or something.
Yeah.
So I agree with how frustrated the Jenkins campaign must be. To put that much energy and to lose by that much. But what I have appreciated is that the federal government was clear, the state government was clear, the justice, the judicial process was quick, expedient, in time for the elections. And I feel like this is a really settled matter.
Well, it is settled because the laws, both on the federal side and on the state side, are really clear. I can understand why the Jenkins campaign is upset, and it's something that I dove into really early on as they were looking to certify the election because I wanted to make sure that we understood and everything was being followed the way it should, and it was. But here's the problem: almost everywhere in the state, you put the ballot in the mail, it's going to be postmarked that day or the next day. Because these ballots went to Las Vegas and didn't get postmarked, in some cases for maybe several days, I can understand why people would be frustrated. Now, not all of those 1,000 ballots that are in question were sent in time, put in the mailbox in time.
Yeah, you don't know if they were a day late, 3 days late, 4 days late.
That's why there's nothing you could do about it because, maybe somebody sent it in on the day, on election day. Well, that's against state law for good reason, right? There's reasons why that's against state law. And so trying to determine which ballots were sent on time and could have been and should have been postmarked on time ended up being virtually impossible. The Jenkins campaign couldn't figure it out. The county clerks couldn't figure it out, and so you have to fall to state statute and federal statute, and so that's what happened. But I'll tell you, given the percentages, if all those votes would have been counted, we could have a different outcome.
Yeah, you don't know which way it would go,
or we could not, or if people who didn't vote voted, it could change.
Yeah,
like the deal is, it's an event. And those who show up have it happen. And like we coulda, shoulda on your entire life. Like had you not moved there, that wouldn't have happened. Like I don't like the coulda, shoulda.
You wouldn't have driven to the
because
store.
The implication is we have a problem with our system. And we do not have systemic election problems in Utah.
No, I don't necessarily think we have systemic, but that is a problem that we need to look at that hadn't been taken into consideration because honestly everybody thought you put it in the day before, you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
Turns out you wasn't.
But that's because our friends at the legislature changed that, including our friend Phil Lyman. It used to have to be postmarked prior than 24 hours ahead. You all changed that in the last couple of days, couple of years. You made it the day before. So we have traditionally, when we moved to vote by mail. We had it 2, I think, to 3 days before. And in the last couple of years, our Republican friends decided to make it the day before.
That's because in Salt Lake County,
oh, that's because it's not working for you right now.
No. Someone could cheat. Someone could see the polls close, have 2 hours to go out and collect a bunch of ballots and run them to the post office and get them postmarked by that day, and actually
so in the pursuit of one conspiracy theory, you have messed up the system. One thing I'd like our listeners to note is that because we podcast now, Mike and I get to sit on the same side of the table.
I know, so you have to turn to look at each other
because now I can smack.
I know. Yeah. Hey, and I do want to give one quick clarification. It sounds like the Utah Supreme Court they heard the case today. They haven't ruled on it, but they were very skeptical, and it doesn't sound like they're going to come back and change anything. So I think we might have to wait a couple days on that. I'll tell you this, though, just be like me. I like the pomp and circumstance of an election, and I don't not trust the Postal Service, but I like to go to the box. I like to stick it in the hole and take out the middleman, and then you don't have to worry about that. But that is something you have to think about. You can't wait, and if you're going to wait to the last day, go to the post office, watch them stamp it, make sure it gets there, because your vote's not going to count if you don't.
We did learn that.
And I'm going to push back on you a little bit. It wouldn't have mattered if it would have been on Election Day or the day before election. We'd still be having the same conversation because there's a large portion of the population that would have waited and done it on Election Day, and then we would have had the same issue. And so either way, whether it's the day before or whether it's on Election Day, this is still an issue that needs to be discussed and figured out.
So here's one. Do we need to figure out our election system before November? We found that Washington County and Tooele had some glitches in the matrix, let's call it, where their voting system was not actually tabulating votes that had been counted. Is there a larger issue we need to worry about, or was that just like a little blip and everything's fine?
I think they fixed it as they went. I mean, I'm not. What I would say is there is no more time where we have been more alert. Yeah. Like everyone is paying attention. So for sure, something will happen. Like it's just a huge system. But I think all the clerks are on high alert in a way that I have not seen in 20 years.
Well, I think the thing that's troubling to me is in that specific circumstance, we wouldn't have known about it. We only knew about it because of the recount. Right, that would have been glossed over, and we wouldn't have known about it. I think being able to catch some of those things up front, I think, is important. And that's a couple of years ago, I ran the bill on an audit that every election gets audited, which I think is so important because now we have auditors in there looking for these types of things, checks and balances. When we got the audit back of the 2022 election, everything came back pretty good, but there was not a lot, but there was a handful of those little things that maybe would have skewed the votes by a handful of votes, but not changed any outcomes. And so I think that's probably the most important thing, is that we continue to look to improve and have the microscopes on it and be open to change and recognize if we need to make change.
Good news is in Utah, there are not very many close elections in November, so it probably isn't going to be a problem, with the exception of Kamala, of course, surging and likely to win Utah.
Okay, we'll talk about that in
just from what I understand.
We got to, before we move on, though, we have to talk about lawsuits. And Speaker Mike, I'm going to let you go first on this. Okay. This is one of your peers, Phil Lyman, ran for governor. He lost by tens of thousands of votes. He's suing now. He wants the removal of the governor out of office right now. I'm not sure even how that would fit into state law at all, and demanding that he be put on the ballot because he won in the GOP caucus convention system by more than 60%. So he thinks by state law that nobody else should be on the ballot and he should come off. Now, as I understand it, the GOP caucus convention system, if there's over 60%, that means you're the one candidate who leaves, you get on the ballot, there's not a second one. It has nothing to do with the SB 54, where people can get their signatures and be on the ballot, right?
Yeah, so Representative Lyman, I think, is going a step too far on this. I've looked at the statute. What Representative Lyman is asking for is against the current statute. Now, I'm in agreement with Representative Lyman that statute probably needs to be changed. I think more transparency is a good thing.
What kind of more transparency? Because we already know that you can get signatures to get on the ballot, which he actually signed up to do and then didn't.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that he's really frustrated about right now is he's not able to look and verify look at all the signatures and those that sign the signatures.
Remind us why that's true, Mike.
Why what's true?
Why you can't see who signed petitions.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about why the law restricts
Laura's
that.
goading you, Mike.
It's a fair question. So a lot of the same people that argued for privacy around some of the voter information are now on the flip side of that, saying that it should be opened up. And that's a fair question. For other reasons, I was never really that big of a fan of closing off voter information. I think candidates ought to be able to have access to the voters. I think it's good to get the information out, and so I think that information ought to be made public. And so one of the things I'm excited about is I think this gives us an opportunity to open that up for the future. But we got to follow the state laws as they are right now. And right now, it doesn't allow for the ones that have checked private, the voters that have checked private, for that information to be turned over to the Lyman campaign. Now, I want to point out that the state law does allow for the Lyman campaign to go inside the elections office and look at all that information. And that has been offered to the Lyman campaign. I'm not sure if they've taken that up or not. But Phil wants all that information given directly to him, and state law just doesn't allow for that.
I don't think this is a real straight up move by Phil Lyman. I think he ran a really good campaign, a really competitive inter-party fight, and he should be applauded for running such a smart campaign. But this is just sour grapes. I don't think we should be giving it this much attention, because in America, where there's so many loud people saying things that don't have much basis, we've got to stop covering them. Just because you're loud doesn't mean you're right. And on this, there is no one on the left or the right that sees merit in this assertion. And so I'm frustrated. I'm not frustrated. Lyman's campaign, great campaign, but enough already of
There
the
were
I
rules, and
lost,
you have
so
to
there
follow by
must
the
be a
rules.
problem with this.
Yeah.
And I think he should, by and large, I think he's moved to sort of doing little show pony things that we shouldn't be paying much attention to.
A lot of the friends that are supporting Phil are friends of mine, and Phil is losing friends, right, or losing support right now in taking it as far as he's taken it. And I think Phil brings up a good point in regards to some of this information voters ought to be able to look at.
I think really
campaigns ought to be able to
importantly,
look at
though,
it. But the state law and
Is he
Phil,
hurting confidence, though, in elections when he does this? Because then he has people who are listening to him, and he's got a loud megaphone right now where they're like, you're right, you got screwed, they went against the law, when that's not the case.
Well, I think here's the case. I think that we do need to look to open some of this stuff up going into the future.
Right,
I
but
think
Mike,
that's the change
that
needs
has
to
nothing
happen.
to do with his assertion. Those are totally different conversations. I mean, as someone who ran the first Count My Vote initiative, who was part of the brokering of SB 54, there is no there on any of this. And then I would also point out that if there's going to be a serious discussion of opening up who signed what, it has to go beyond ballot measures, right? It has to go beyond signature petitions. It should go back and look at voter data. Several years ago, the legislature restricted voter data, and you could choose to make your voter data private or public. Now, I still think that it was in the best interest of the public that, frankly, special interest groups, parties, and civic participants all had access to the voter rolls. Sure. I am a fan of the transparency all the way around, and as the Republicans have further restricted this information, I love from that perspective that a conservative Republican is challenging this notion, but I will say it will not feel like an honest attempt if they only look at candidate signatures and they don't look at ballot initiative signatures, and they don't look at voter registration.
Yeah. And one other thing that's important, because I've seen on social media people confused because they're like, well, what if 6 of those were faulty? Because he had 28,000 and then 6 that were counted. But you should know that no one's turning in 28,006. They just stopped counting at that point because they don't need to count anymore. I'm sure that Governor Cox has another stack of ballots that if 6 were thrown out, they could count more.
Not Governor Cox. He's turned them over. He's turned them over
Correct.
to the Davis County Clerk.
And they have them.
And it's over 500 additional signatures that have not been counted. So to that point, even if there were some that were found to be fraudulent, there's still 500 more that they could go through to check. So,
all right.
We agreed.
That was nice.
It sounded more aggressive, but I just want to point out.
you were definitely more
was
aggressive
nice.
than I was. But
Oh,
but I did
please.
say I think Phil is overstepping where he should be right now.
I want to get to the presidential election, but a quick mention. One of the political reporters, I think that's been most trusted in the state, Brian Schott of the Salt Lake Tribune, was fired this week after saying on Twitter, now known as X, that he would buy banned books with sexual content for kids. We don't know what went on at his offices. We can't pretend that we know what went on between he and his bosses, but it did happen not long after that. So there's an assumption that was either the straw that broke the camel's back or something else happened. Do we need to be worried about politics and journalists and how they communicate with the public online? Because it seems like that seems to be part of the problem here that people are talking about. Either of you have any feelings on this?
I've got a lot of feelings on this.
Share your feelings.
Share your feelings. Mara, you're so nice today.
I'll tell you what, I got to know Brian Schott about 9 years ago. And for the first 5 years...
When he was at Utah Policy, probably.
He was at Utah Policy. And I found him and Bob Bernick to be a couple of the most fair, honest journalists on Capitol Hill. You can look in to read and see that Brian's probably pretty liberal, but I never had any firm confirmation of that during those first 5 years. Then he went to the Salt Lake Tribune. And at first, it was okay, but his true colors started to shine more and more and more and more and more. And you started to see who Brian Schott was on his social media posts and everything else. And it transformed and translated into his journalism. And my understanding is, Salt Lake Tribune had a policy in regards to social media and being nonpartisan. And Brian had been breaking that policy over and over again. Again, I don't want to get too much into the details because I don't know what's true, what's not true. But I
just so we know, I contacted the Tribune and also texted Brian, who didn't answer back, so we don't have answers on that. My
understanding, I do know this, there'd been a lot of people both inside and outside of the Salt Lake Tribune that had complained to management about Brian and his social media posts, and that this was finally the straw that broke the camel's back. But
firing a journalist for their speech, that's a tough one, right? I mean, it's also interesting that the Tribune is a nonprofit, right? It's not bound by it's maybe bound by the same ethics, but it's not if they choose to. But it's an interesting thing. The other thing I did, when I saw the phrasing of this, I was like, where's the post? And I grabbed a screenshot from Eric Mustos, who is not a huge fan of Brian Schott. So this is why I'm trusting the screenshot.
I have read it, so tell me what it says. I don't have it on my phone anymore.
Here was Brian Schott's post, according to Eric Mustos. There are books that are now banned in every school library. If you are a high school student who wants to read one of these books and your parents are okay, say it's okay, I will purchase it for you. And then he has a list of books.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's ours to decide if the Tribune, but I will say, when I heard that he was offering I was like, what does that mean to offer to buy pornographic books? I will just clarify the semantics on this. I don't think that's what this says. I think it says, if you're one of these high schools and your parents say it's okay, I'll ban these books. In the span of
Slightly
what Brian...
weird, though. I've read some texts, grabs from those books, and while adults can choose to read those, I'm
but
like,
Heidi,
that's pretty
it
graphic
says if
sex.
your parents are okay.
That's true.
So you're moving on to whether you're an okay.
No, it doesn't matter. The state statute didn't say if your parents say okay.
You don't control his speech. The state statute has nothing to do with Brian Schott's speech. You don't get to decide despite you wanting to, you do not get to make choices for my children and I about what gets read and who buys that for them. That's a hard line right there.
These state statute says that you cannot distribute pornography to children. And that's what... These books,
and this isn't pornography.
These books were taken.
State has,
no.
The school districts have deemed them not in their library, but
because of the pornographic materials inside those books.
That is a judgment call of an individual district.
But the state law says if 3 districts make that judgment call, then
it'll go out of the library.
So
you're instructing your jurisdiction, which is in Utah schools. You do not get to decide what individuals consume. That is beyond your ability. Even though you're a super
No.
majority, you do not get to decide what my child reads.
Parents cannot distribute pornographic materials.
These have not
to
been
minors.
deemed pornographic.
That's why
these
they
have
were-
been deemed that a parent and a teacher group has decided they're not eligible for their school libraries.
Because of the pornographic
Because
material
they
inside. And
believe
have you looked to
they
see
are
what
not
some of these-
appropriate for that library.
Have you looked and seen what some of these
That's not the
books,
issue,
13
Mike. The
books
issue
had in
is
them?
not what you and I want to consume. The issue is what people have the right to do.
Yeah, but
back
state
to
statute,
Brian
then
Schott.
they need to change state statute and said, okay, if your parents are okay with it, then they can distribute pornographic materials to these kids. Because that's why
So
those
you're
were
telling
taken
me
out.
that I can't choose what my child reads because the state school board won't let it be read?
No, because the state law says that if it's pornographic materials, you
Right, who
cannot
gets to
distribute
decide?
that
The
to
school
a
board
minors.
gets to decide if it's pornographic? That's not what the state statute says. The school board gets to decide if they will distribute it in their library, which is wholly appropriate.
But
So
it
maybe he
says
should have
if it's got
encouraged kids to go to the
pornographic
county
materials,
library
they
and
can't-
check them
they-
out.
I'm not
they can't-
defending whether Brian Schott shows good judgment on X,
This-
because one of the things we know is both legislators and journalists should probably just stay off of social media. I know there's a great deal of pressure for personalities to be multi-platform, but like every bad thing happens on Twitter. Like
It
it's
is true.
Just,
It's
a
part of my
cesspool.
job to be on there, and sometimes
I
it
say
gives
the
me
speaker
the
Schultz.
worst anxiety. We're going to move along, but
You
do you
want
want
some-
to?
on Twitter.
Hey, no, you want some entertainment? Go read the post or the comments on my Twitter feed. If I get bored one day,
It's
that's what I do. It is
just
just
a
makes
cesspool.
me
People are
giggle.
insane.
It
I
is
do
so-
want
it
to
is.
say that the much talked about debate that we've talked about that I did here for the gubernatorial debate, Brian Schott worked with me here at KUTV. We actually found political journalists and scientists like across the spectrum to sit down, talk about, hash out the issues, and figure out which direction to go on the debate. I worked with him then. He was terrific. And so I hope that old Brian comes back again. I'm wishing him the best. 'cause
I agree with
no one
Mike
wants
on
to
that
miss
as
a job.
too. Utah Policy Daily was started by the Exoro Group. We hired Brian Schott to run Utah Policy Daily with Bob Bernick. They were running a nice, tight shop. He cares. He is educated. He's civically minded. And like I think the three of us agree, it is not ours to decide. But it is interesting that Tribune, I am going to call the Tribune on, they owe us an explanation because their ethos is to go get explanations. And so I think if you live by the sword, you got to die by the sword. And I think the Tribune owes the public a better explanation of this.
And I think we all make accidents when you tweet something and you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't, or you put something up. I think there's been a few things recently where he posted where I'm like, that's not real. Why'd you retweet that?
Yeah.
And so there's probably more to it, and maybe we'll never know. But hopefully the Tribune does answer, because I know that there are unions trying to get answers, because obviously we need political reporters who are holding people like Mike Schultz accountable, because we can't just let these politicians run
we
amok.
also
I
need
got to
some
push
people-
back on that. It is not the reporter's job to hold me accountable. That is the job of the public. It is the reporter's job to give a fair, accountable reporting on what I'm doing or what I'm not doing, and then the public gets
They
to
can
hold me
decide.
accountable.
We bring them the
but
facts.
that's where I think the Tribune's messed this up, is they view it as their job to hold people accountable, and so they skew their stories certain ways. No, we just want fair, honest, accurate reporting, and then let the voters make the decision.
All right, we're going to talk presidential timeline for a minute. We're going to work our way back. So President Trump is out of the headlines right now. His assassination attempt was 3.5 weeks ago, so that's no longer news. We'll get to that in a minute. Biden is out. Harris is in. She's picked Walz as her running mate. Shapiro was passed over. A lot of people have ideas of whether or not he was passed over, possibly because he was Jewish or because he was so charismatic and he would take the limelight away from her. Interestingly enough, we were talking about the last time we were on this podcast that if Biden did step down, and that was a big if, we were like, who's it going to be? Because VP Harris is not that popular. And then the question is, well, you can't go past the first woman, especially the first black woman. You can't say no to her. So there was all these questions about who are you going to run, because she's just not a great candidate. She's the candidate. She essentially, within 12 hours, had the Democratic Party's anointing, millions and millions of dollars coming in for fundraising. Mara, all of a sudden, VP Harris is now the best candidate the
She's a rock
Democratic
star.
Party has ever had.
She's-
How did this happen?
I don't know, because she so exceeded my expectations. I would have been a member of the club, and I've said this, that was like, not her. Like, I didn't think she had the legs. Man, She has come out of the gate heavy, like much better
She
than any of us
hasn't done
has expected.
anything. Nobody sees her. Nobody does anything.
Mike,
It's all
she
this.
raised more money in 1 week than Trump
That was
had
the Democratic apparatus behind her and the
I'm
media
telling
and
you,
all that.
you-
She hasn't done anything. Where has she been? She
you
was in
and
front of
I
a
are
camera
going
for
to
2 minutes the other day.
please.
Outside of that was yesterday. Outside of that, she is MIA. It's
I
all the
love
hype
this.
around
I
her.
love this. I hope you all continue to believe that. I hope you form a tight circle and keep patting your good old boy backs and
Look,
telling yourselves that you're doing a good job.
If I
Because
was
she is crushing it right
If
now.
I was a Democrat, I would be madder than a hornet. The fact that I got robbed of picking my presidential nominee as a candidate.
How was the coronation of President and King Trump? How did the RNC work that out? Because that was a heck of a good battle, wasn't it?
Well, we had 7 or 8 great candidates. Got narrowed down to 5. 5 amazing
I'm sorry,
candidates.
remind me of your
that went
favorite
through-
debate that Trump had with that
that went through
massive group of people that were trying
I was
to
madder
issue
than a
president.
hornet that Trump didn't go to those debates, but he still won fair and square.
Oh, right, but he didn't participate in the process, which you didn't have a
He
problem
did
with
too
when it
participate
was
in the
Trump.
process. He was on the ballot in all 50 states. They got to go through
Biden
and
and Harris
choose
were
the-
on the ballot.
No,
Here's
Biden
the
was
thing.
on
If
the
the
ballot.
Democrats don't have a problem with their nomination, you can't have a
Well,
problem with their
I'm just saying, if
nomination.
I don't have a problem with their nomination.
Did you
I
see
think
Heidi
it's great.
just had to turn on Mike's down?
I know I did. I was like, whoa, buddy, the audio is too hot.
I think it's great for a Republican. I think it's fantastic. It couldn't have gone any better.
You
Tell
keep
me-
thinking that.
Tell me what Kamala has done over the last 4 years. What has she done? Give me one policy achievement she has made. over
So
the last 4
she's
years.
recognized that you are not in swing, so she doesn't much care about talking to you, Mike. But I am just
Give
let's
us
go back
one
to
policy
let's go
thing
back
that
to
she's
balls
had a
and
win on.
strikes.
She hasn't done
I was
nothing.
not a Kamala fan. I was not coming into this going. She is going to
Did
run.
Megan Thee Stallion like change your mind and you're like, ooh, girl,
That's exactly.
you got it.
I just am telling you, she has yet to really misstep. Now, there's plenty of time.
Oh, she's going
There's
to. Just give her a
plenty
minute.
of time, but you have to just
Is there though? Because she's
It's
saying
been
she's not going to do
90
an
days.
interview for a month.
And
I
let's
think
talk
that's-
about this issue.
I'm like,
Tell me
let's-
what the cadence is. Tell me what the standard procedure is.
There
for,
is no standard
oh,
procedure
okay.
anymore.
So are we just making up things here? Because
No,
but I
when
think
you're
the-
running for the president, you need to make yourself accessible,
She
open
is.
to the media. No, she is
she's
not.
meeting with thousands of people.
I don't know that meeting on a
She
stage
has
with a
not-
teleprompter. So here's my question:
Yes.
because if she doesn't
Okay,
talk
so then
to people for a
debates
month,
aren't helpful because that's on a stage.
Well,
with
she's
a
only,
teleprompter.
she's only she just reported yesterday. She's only saying yes to one debate.
No, she said
That-
she is in for the September 10th and she's looking at the others.
and I really do hope
I
they
hope
debate
she
because
goes
here's
to
the
with the
question
others.
that we have because we all saw Kamala Harris when she was running for president, and I think that she was running.
Oh, she was horrible.
Yeah, she didn't do a good job. She was one of the first to drop out because she
Horrible.
didn't get any leeway, and she was running hard left when she was running against Biden. So I guess the question she has to answer, because I looked up on Trump's website and Biden's website whether the websites matter or not. There's policy issues on Trump's. He's been around long enough. We know what he stands for, what he doesn't stand for, and what he might waffle on. The question with her at this point is she still running as president as the person she ran 4 years ago, or has she moderated and changed? And I think that that's what voters probably need to know, because right now all we're hearing is the sniping between Trump calling people the fake made up names that he makes up, and then now we've got the new attack dog for Walz for Harris too, where they're like, well, he won't get off the couch or he did this, and I'm like, oh my gosh, let's talk issues, because I think at this point voters deserve to know the issues. I know this has been a wild election year, but I think Trump and Harris both need to really buckle down and tell people what they stand for. This can't just be like the personalities where let's vote our first woman president and let's vote Trump, wherever you want to call him. I think we need to know where they stand. Don't you think? I don't know.
I philosophically agree with you. But if someone supports Trump, they cannot look at me and tell me that issues are important, because I dare you to find an issue. That man is like listening to a constant stream of consciousness. The closest thing I can find to an issue for him is Project 2025, and that scares me to death.
Which he has
And
denounced, right?
Which he never clearly says anything.
His biggest
So,
issue
yeah,
is coming back and undoing all the garbage
Kamala
that the Biden
has been
administration
an
has put into
elected
place over
official
the
for
last 4 years.
decades. Like, one of my early objections to her when she ran against Biden is that she's frankly too right on law enforcement. I mean, Mike must love her because she is a law and order gal. She put more people in prison than probably anybody. I mean, she's an interesting candidate, but I'm just saying she has been an elected official for years. So to say she's an unknown on where she'll be.
Even her prosecutor years were different, where she was like super hard on crime and then not hard on crime. So I guess it depends, and which we can all change, which I accept.
But I think we know as much about her and her positions as we know about Donald Trump and his position.
So they both need to debate like 6 times.
Both of them need to step up and do something substantive.
How you can say you're questioning where Donald Trump is on any position right now, it blows my mind. Donald Trump is more transparent on all the positions and gets out there.
He never
and talks
says a
about
thing. Dude just wanders around for a while, says nonsense for a while, self-congratulates for a while, name calls for a while, and calls it a day.
But he also talks
then he
about
goes
positions
and puts on more tan.
and goes into detail about some of those positions. But here's the thing. We look at, here's why look, Walz couldn't have been a worse pick for
why?
Kamala. Because
he's too normal?
No, normal.
Because he's too common
this
sense.
Guy is
he looks
crazy
oddly old for 60.
Look at
That's not a real reason.
He does look oddly old for 60.
Look at Minnesota. Crime is up in Minnesota, and the economy is down.
Crime is up in Utah.
I know that's a problem.
Why don't we throw you bumps out?
Still,
like crime is
still crushing
and you know who has the best crime rate in the nation right now? Boston, Massachusetts. Thank you to the liberals. There have only been 10 murders this year in Boston, Massachusetts. So I mean, like I'm telling you that the statistic is not going to carry.
Yeah, well, we could get into a whole issue on why there's the crimes up in Utah, and it really
because of Republican leadership.
No, because.
Well, then don't tell me that Minnesota's crime rate is up.
It is.
And that's the governor's fault. But it's not Governor Cox's fault, interestingly enough, the crime rate's up in Utah.
Well, you
so let's pick another issue to say that Walz doesn't know what he's doing.
The state is doing stuff about it.
So is Walz then. And I'm just saying, if crime being up is the reason you can't be a governor,
Shapiro would have been 100 times better choice.
Why?
Pennsylvania.
We know that the VP's home state does not account for more than 1.5 points.
More moderate. Well, 1.5 points in this election will make a big difference. More moderate, more in line with the American people. The American people are not as far left as the Biden administration has been and governed, or they're as far right as certainly far left as Walz is. And I think this is why I'm not worried about the 2024 election in November. People have had enough of the policies that have been put in place, and they are feeling it.
So you don't think that Harris has re-energized the Democratic ticket?
I certainly, she has. No, there's no doubt in my mind.
And you don't think she's polling better than Biden was?
She is, but she's still not pulled ahead in the keys.
Is she polling better,
they're
or are
always
people
so
so
in the margin of error each time?
Yeah.
Like we're at split. We're at a split nation.
This is my question, though.
The only way Kamala wins this is if she pulls a card out of the 2020 election where she stays in the basement and does not get out.
Or Trump and J.D. Vance keep talking. That's another strategy. I mean, there's that.
Yeah.
I love it
My
when
question
Trump
with the
talks
polls,
and
though,
when J.D.
and
Vance talks, because I think they're doing a good job.
I hate the polls because when we were looking at Trump in his original election running against Hillary Clinton, she was up by a solid 6 points when she lost. So the polls don't mean a lot. But what my question is right now, are people that excited about Harris, or are they just so relieved that it's not Biden?
No, this
I don't know the difference between those two.
I have a choice with Trump. This has, in many ways, little to do with the Harris ticket. It is they feel like they have they don't want to vote for Trump. They didn't want to vote for Biden. We knew that. The one thing we all shared is we didn't want to vote for Trump or Biden. And now you have another choice. And so I think it's an oddly anti-Trump vote that may bring her in. The other thing is that's so interesting is she's taking away, at least it looks like right now, this may not hold, but if you look right now where she's interesting, is she's pulling young people, and Trump, for whatever reason, had some mojo with some young people, or they were staying home, and she's getting them out. The other thing is he was pulling, Trump was doing surprisingly well for a Republican with black and brown communities. Black communities have now shifted back to a traditional Democratic ticket, and brown communities seem to be softening. Now, those are all stereotypes. Those are like big tranches of people, but she is taking away from some groups that were historically Democrat who had leaned Trump. They look to be coming back to the Democrats.
I agree with Maura, believe it or not, on that.
Wow.
And I think, but I don't think it's enough to win in November. I don't think it's going to be enough. I think Kamala will win the popular vote.
We've got to practice this.
Kamala.
I think Kamala will win the popular vote, but lose pretty heavily on the electoral vote.
So here's something that's been interesting to me. The Democratic Party, well, whether you can say it was the machine that's energized or if it was just all her, I think the Democrats have always been better at organizing. And you see with Trump right now that I don't think they're nearly as well organized. One of the organizing things that they did right out of the gate for fundraising was the black women for Harris, the black men, the white women, the white dudes, and now most recently LDS for Harris. And I mean, who's to say who you hang out with and fundraise? I felt a little odd about it when we hate to, I guess, put people in groups and say blacks and whites and this. Was this a good way to fundraise, or is this just taking us back to days where we can't all just be
let's ask
American
this.
people?
What if Trump would have done that?
He has. I have conflict with this because I do feel like Democrats have taken identity politics too far. And so I'll just be out there about one of my major criticisms of Democrats is how they're using the terminology identity politics. Having said that, the tricky part about identity politics is there is a point in which we say, oh gosh, we're similar. Why don't we join together and say people like us are supportive? And so that's the trick about when you turn it up too far.
But even then, women for Harris, but it just felt icky to me. But people who were doing it were loving it.
Into it because they're choosing an affinity group and they're saying this kind of an affinity group. I will just bring my bias in which I think the Democrats are taking the identity politics too far. But here's the thing. Who am I to say these groups are self-rallying, right? They're forming, they're energized, they're excited. The other thing that's more interesting is the merch. So I think another sign of if you're getting some grassroots support, I mean, they're rolling out, I'm getting probably not as much as Mike, but I'm probably getting 30 things a day from Trump. I'm clearly showing his targeting is working.
Text or emails or?
All of it.
Okay.
And then from the Harris campaign, I'm getting 50. And their stuff is so dialed right now. They've come out with a new stream of posters that if I don't buy the poster today, and the hats and the da-da-da-da-da. Now, I will tell you, the only time you've seen this kind of momentum
Did you buy a camo hat?
Around, I haven't, is around the MAGA gear. So the fact that they can produce merch, I do think is a sign of grassroots. I like politics, just follow the money.
It'll be interesting to see.
I wish you could all see Mike Schultz's face. If you're watching online, you can.
Well, I was giggling there for a minute when Mara was agreeing with me on that Democrats have taken identity politics way too far. So I'm glad she's came around to where Greg Hughes and I are at. We're rubbing off on you.
I have that position.
We just work so hard to be Americans that sometimes when we like split it down to groups like that, it just makes me feel uncomfortable.
And the key part of that sentence is too far. I'm not suggesting that there are not moments to form affinity groups. It's that when that's the most important, and it's never more important to be a Utah or something that is somewhat more neutral, or a human, or an American, or supportive of, our president. Because I think those points are, as painful as it was, I will acknowledge that President Trump was my president, and I should have treated that office with the respect that it deserves.
Wow.
That's fair.
These are big moments for everyone. Okay, speaking of presidents.
As will Mike when Kamala Harris is our president.
President Biden
I don't think I'm going to have to. That's
is
a good
still
point.
our president, and nobody's talking about him. As soon as his friends chopped him off at the legs, and everyone now, they're like, oh, he's like the most influential, most important president we've ever had. He was so selfless. He did not step down out of the kindness out of his heart and the goodness of, I think Pelosi was like the real henchman in this. She says she never called him.
Okay, I'm going to defend him.
You think
I'm going to defend him.
You think he did? Just say,
no,
you're right.
I think he
prayed
was
about this.
Forced. But I think he always had a choice. So I am going to give him a credit of being cut from old cloth. And that cloth is John McCain. And I do think at the end of the day, this is a public servant.
He saw.
This is a man who has done serious public service. And I don't think he would have come to this on his own. I'm not giving him this individualized credit. But to take away the credit of a man who is the sitting president, is in order to be in that position, you have a huge ego. He despises Donald Trump. He deeply believes that there's a problem. And for him to put aside his own interest and step up deserves the respect, even though it was a forced situation. I just think, but to your first point, where is he? He is.
Should we be worried about him?
There is no. Okay, Mike.
Not that he's dead, but he's still the president in charge of some big things.
He is in charge. He's fine. He's running the government. He's not lost his mind. I feel a complete degree of confidence that the Biden administration is fine and doing well.
Well, they've never been fine and doing well, but I think he's
non-politically.
alive and he's there. Yes, but I just a couple things on this. Look. He did make the choice. There's no doubt about it. But I was surprised at how hard Biden came out fighting all the criticism after the debate. He came out swinging and fighting. Even Jill came out fighting and swinging and saying, no, we're the nominee. We're going to move forward. And I thought he would have rolled over sooner than he did, honestly. But, there's no doubt he was forced out. But I do believe ultimately it was his decision. And I will give him a little credit for finally making probably the right decision. I would have rather him stayed in because Trump was set for a landslide. If Biden would have stayed in, Trump would have won by a large margin, I think, both the popular vote and the electoral vote. But
so you're very disappointed in Biden not holding his ground?
I wish he would have held his ground and stayed. He was forced out
and here we are.
Here we are.
Yes, and that already seems like forever ago. So now we need to talk about something that I think in a normal world, if the world weren't doing what it's doing right now, that we would still be talking in great force about the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. That was only 3.5 weeks ago, and it seems like it's old news. But I'm just reminded, I would like to say here, I do not think Taylor Swift and our president are the same thing, but we're seeing threats in large crowds, attempted assassins from other countries that concern me. So Taylor Swift, if you follow, has the end of her European leg, and 3 concerts were just canceled because there were 3 teenagers who had connections to ISIS who it looked like were going to attack these concerts and take them down. We're now learning that also a couple days before that Pennsylvania rally, someone who had connections to Iran had been hired to kill possibly Trump and other political leaders. I don't know that there was a Republican or Democrat name on them, but other countries wanted them killed. Then we have the separate incident where we have another youngish kid who obviously was successful, made his way around the Secret Service, fired off shots. 1 person's dead, 2 other people seriously injured, and Trump grazed by a bullet. And we have a Secret Service that everyone's wondering, okay, we've got, 90 days till this election? Can we make it safely there? What do we think?
Violence is a problem, right? I mean, the escalation, the extremist. If we're sticking with America, I do think there's a correlation between access to weapons, mental state. I'm not suggesting we're rounding up weapons, but taking more steps in how you get one, what the training is that is required, the reciprocity between states, I think is a problem. But violence for sure in America is a definite issue, and amping up our political speech isn't helping. And that is an equal opportunity offender. That does not live in the right or the left world. One small correction, and what happened to Donald Trump was unacceptable and super scary. But I will say he wasn't grazed by a bullet. He was grazed by shrapnel, which isn't okay. But I will say the shooter wasn't on point. That's why the person who died wasn't on the stage.
The FBI and the Secret Service put out a statement, and they said that it was a bullet or shrapnel. They're not sure exactly which one. So
yeah, and if they're looking at
them.
the 4-string trajectory, it wasn't on the stage. That's why you don't see anybody on the stage. That's sort of potato because no one should have been given the opportunity.
Either way, someone tried to kill him.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Look, I want to give a little credit to the Democrats on this because I did watch there for a moment them rally and unite and say what happened was wrong, which I didn't think I would see that from a lot of my Democratic friends, to be honest with you. And the one thing that I do like right now is both the Democrats and the Republicans are concerned with what's happening inside the Secret Service. And I want to give the Secret Service credit because they are concerned with what's happening inside the Secret Service. I saw a quote that came out from the Secret Service saying, look, we recognize there's some problems here. We're doing all we can to fix it because if they would be defiant, saying, no, things are fine, we got this under control, I think all of us would be nervous. But the fact they recognize that they have some problems in the security that they provide for some of the most powerful people in the world, they need to do a better job.
And I'm not giving them a pass, because they need to do a better job, and we all think. Yeah. But one of the things that we all need to participate in as citizens is what you said, Heidi, which is the world is a more complicated, scarier place than 20 years ago. Providing Secret Service protection meant something very different. And so we are going to need to fund efforts. Yeah. We are going to need to have real conversations about violence. I mean, when we talk about the perimeter, which seemed to have been a problem, well, then the next perimeter and the next perimeter. We also have to acknowledge that one of the things that I think is happening more and more in America is that we choose an agency, an entity, an elected official to say it's their fault and their problem. And again, we all agree the Secret Service needs to do better, but we have to be a part of the solution. We are the people that are coming up with these weapons. You can't say it's a them problem. It's got to be all of us saying, wow, why are we living in a culture right now? And I will say one thing that happened to me, I'm not a particularly worried person. I'm not a fretter. Last couple of years, I've been to some major events and thought, oh, wow, this is like an ideal place. And that thought never crossed my mind until a couple of years. Unfortunately, it is an ideal
place. I mean, look at what we just mentioned with this Taylor Swift concert. You're looking at the Western ideals and how can you do something bad? I mean, it's in Europe. They had knives and explosives. So, I mean, they were figuring out a way to do it. But I hate living like that. Yeah. And there were a few minutes, maybe even a few days after the rally in Pennsylvania where I felt that maybe we were going to have a kinder, gentler election cycle.
Me too.
That didn't last very long for either side, which is disappointing because I hate it when bad things happen, but I look back to 9/11. We've talked about this before, and that was awful. None of us want to relive it. But I did like that afterwards that no one was thinking Democrats or Republicans. We were Americans, and we cared about each other. And there was that nice feeling. And I thought after the attempt that maybe we would get back to that spot, but no.
Well, I get it. Donald Trump's never going to go clear to where a lot of us think he probably should in his rhetoric and some of the things that he says. But that man is a changed man, and he has significantly scaled back some of the rhetoric after that. And so, I think that's a good thing, and I think that's what will likely...
he's still calling names. He's still telling people...
He needs to stop
still
at the name
indicating that if he doesn't get elected, you should think about rising up. I want him to be a changed man. But I see
he will never get to that point. But you can't say that he hasn't dialed a lot of it back, because he has. He's dialed back a lot of that rhetoric. I get it. He occasionally goes off and does...
Occasionally? Okay.
Look... Let's come back to, you said something.
He rambles a lot right now.
You said something that I think is important for us to recognize. You said a lot of this is being driven, I think, by the rhetoric on both the right and on the left. And we need to recognize that and do all we can to soften the tones on both the right and on the left. And I think that's something that...
And here's where to start. I mean, in some ways, it's not hard to start. It's got to stop being personal. It's got to stop being about people are good and bad. I'm going to use Mike and I. Mike and I are actually good friends.
Yeah, you are.
We do not agree on things. But I care more that I think he's a good person, even when he is blatantly wrong on things. And one of the things that is a C-note change is... Back in the olden days, we would criticize each other's ideas. Because that's the genesis of a democracy. We should fight each other, because what happens is I end up taking 30, 40, 50% of what I say I hate because I'm open enough. And we should fight ideas. We should fight real things, but we're not. We're fighting each other sometimes, which is why the name calling is not just excusable, and why characterizing people as good or bad, or their intentions as good or bad, as flippantly as we are. Yeah. As flippantly as we are.
We could draw that back. I think we could make a big difference, and I think social media unfortunately feeds that. I want to backtrack for a second, too, because we don't have a ton of time, but to the RNC. Before we've seen the Harris campaign get a real moment in the spotlight, she's, kind of taken over the news cycle. She's doing well. I was surprised by, I guess, the momentum and the feel at the Republican National Convention as well, because over the years, there hasn't always been that same excitement. Trump's had his own conventions where he people were fighting against him. In 2016, the Utah caucus was trying to figure out how they could take him out before he actually was nominated.
Yeah.
But it did feel like the Republican Party kind of was all on the same page there for a week.
The Republican Party is more united on a nationwide around Donald Trump than they have been at any point in time over the last 8 years. That's why I think you will see Donald Trump win in November.
I think that's absolutely true. I think what I would clarify is the Republican Party is not conservative voters, and it is not necessarily Republican elected voters. So when you saw, and this will be true of the Democrats, those who show up at conventions are the hardcore of the hardcore. And what the Republicans pulled off at that convention was phenomenal. It was staged and beautiful from start to finish. But I would differentiate between party delegates, and I would do this for the Democrats too, and just a casual Republican voter, or even someone who calls themselves a conservative voter.
And I agree with Mara on that. The convention is definitely more your really conservative wing of the Republican Party.
Did you go to the convention?
I did.
Okay.
I did. And I got. But however, at the same time, you had Nikki Haley come speak at that convention. You had Ron DeSantis come speak at that convention. All of which said, let's get behind our president and Donald Trump to help him win in November. You saw Spencer Cox come on board.
Yes, we have to talk about that. That was a big change.
And there's several of my Republican friends that have just said, I can't get there with Donald Trump. I can't get there with Donald Trump. Now that have said that because of what's happened or whatever, and they recognize the failures of the Biden administration and what it is doing to Utah and our nation, have said he is the better option of the two.
Did he sell his soul to the devil? If you look on social media, Democrats are upset.
That was a weird move from Spencer Cox.
Or was it a conciliatory move after an assassination attempt, and he thought, okay, I'm going to do my part?
For sure it was that. I mean, that was a distinct and intense moment in time.
Spencer did this because he felt in the bottom of his heart that was the right thing to do, and to help unify the Republican Party. And he didn't have to. If he was smart, he would have done that during the campaign, during the primary, if he cared about it and was doing it for any other reason than what he felt was the best thing to do.
Donald Trump certainly can be credited with a ton of pivots, and it'll be interesting to see. Now we're like on third and fourth pivot by some of our elected officials. It'll be interesting to see what pivot 10 and 11 look like, either for Donald Trump or against Donald Trump.
Yeah, I feel like Trump is in his case isn't the one pivoting. It's people who are choosing to follow him.
He's just this blob of energy, and it's amazing. I mean, everyone has hated him before they've loved him, and then half of those lovers have also now hated. I mean, he is such a polarizing figure.
I will agree with Mara on that, and because we have history to look back and see it happened, and there is a risk on the Republican side that something happens, and the public pivots, or the Republican portion of the Republican Party pivots and moves somewhere else. That is a risk. I don't think that happens, but it certainly is.
He has seemed to lose some energy since Biden's dropped out, and I don't know if it's because he's trying to refigure how he runs against Harris, or if he just was really running because he wanted to beat Biden. But he doesn't seem as energetic since.
Give it a minute. It was.
He's old. He needs some time to recalibrate.
It was the same thing the Democrats dealt with right after the assassination attempt. There was nothing they could have done to put some walls around that momentum that was coming. But it will die off, just like the Kamala stuff will die off. That will happen, and
What do we think about sorry, go ahead. I was going to ask you about your Vance pick afterwards, if that was a good choice or if he made a Sarah Palin choice on that one.
Well, I love this pick so much. There's just nothing I don't love about J.D. Vance on a microphone, because he's a hot mess. Like, he is a wannabe Donald Trump, and what we've already decided is that we have a whole different set of rules for Donald Trump. Why? I do not know, but he is exempted from everything. So when J.D. Vance in his sass stands up and says awful things that people shouldn't be saying, we're not giving him a pass on that. And Donald Trump, it's interesting, you usually don't see people pick mini-me's, right? Usually you see them pick like a balance, whoever that is. And
the Pence pick, yeah.
Right, exactly. Pence made sense. J.D. Vance, I think, was a better pick when it was Biden, for sure. He's a less good pick I think now that, and he's not a great attacker of Harris, and traditionally the VP shouldn't be. I mean, VPs are always picked. You saw this in Walz this week too. They're always picked as the attack dog. But I think it's a mismatch with J.D. Vance and Kamala Harris. But I think he is a mess, which I love.
I'm excited for J.D. Vance.
Why?
And I'm excited because of where he came from. This guy came
He's from Yale.
After he was on the streets.
He's a blue blood.
No.
The funny thing is that the
He's
national media
blue-collar.
ate him up when he came out with his book and his story. But now it's just like, well, you're not that dirty of trash. You went to.
Here's somebody that came from nothing, that had the opportunity to attend Yale because of his hard work and getting somewhere. He brings a different perspective that I think resonates with the average citizen.
It would be kind of like being a high school teacher and a football coach, like that kind of salt of the earth guy. Oh, wait a minute, he's an attorney. That's right, it's Walz who's a high school teacher. Yeah. The Democrats are who have the blue collar guy.
Yeah, but they don't, because they're losing blue collar left and right because of their policy. But here's something about J.D. Vance. Not only does he have that background of coming from nothing, coming from poverty, and making something out of his life, that is something that I think is unique with politicians, and I think that's what will help resonate as he's trying to appeal to the average blue-collar citizen in this nation.
Yeah.
I think that's what will help him as we go forward.
Teach me. I need you to teach me something.
Oh, wow.
If this is important.
This is a trick question.
If this is important, how could you choose the most blue-blooded, silver-spooned person in Donald Trump? If it's a deeply held value that you should be able to relate to the average American, how can the top of your ticket be one of the most isolated? Like, he has been in the 1% his entire life.
Let me answer that question. This
Maybe
is an
they're
easy
the
question.
balance.
Answer this question. Why is the blue-collar worker going to Donald Trump like crazy?
They're not. They're going more than any other Republican. But that's like saying,
You have Democrat
diversity is
blue-collar.
up in Utah.
You have Democrat blue-collars moving towards...
More than any other, but that does not make it many.
The unions are a mess right now. The unions don't know which way to
are
go.
digging Kamala Harris like
unions
nobody's business.
Really? Because that's
She's
why we
held
had the
2
head of
rallies.
the Teamsters Union at the RNC.
You're thinking back to 2 and 3 days ago, and he did not give an endorsement, and it was only the Teamsters. I mean, I'm telling you, you should be weeping over Kamala Harris. She's kicking your trash.
So have you decided to change your vote? Because you were going to go
Kennedy.
all third-party Kennedy, but now he's thrown a bear in the park. And
Well,
so
and
where
the
are
problem
you at?
too is he's pummeled, like he's plummeted. He's in the single digits now. I don't know. I'm an undecided. I would like to
okay.
be courted.
All right,
She'll go Kamala.
You don't know.
I
you
know that.
do not
I
know.
know you well enough to know you're going Kamala.
You don't know. Here's one thing I want to point out, because I think you should do a podcast with Mike about this.
Okay.
But I would be there.
I'm listening.
But
But I will have to be there.
I want to listen to it. I don't have to have a mic. So one of the things I think is that I would like to hear more from Speaker Schultz is that you have this unique seat, and I think it is both an advantage and a disadvantage, in that you are getting to know these people personally. Mm-hmm. So I have both the bias and the clear-eyedness of not having interacted with them. So you have started to form these emotional and personal relationships with these objectively horrible lawmakers. And so
I like that you called them objectively horrible lawmakers instead of people. That was like a nice little bridge to the.
So I think I'm interested. This is where I tap Speaker Schultz, because
Are you talking about our local lawmakers or Trump?
No. All of this is national politics.
Okay.
He's got a relationship with the Trumps. I think you've started to get to know J.D. Vance. Because of your role, you are also getting these personal relationships. And so I think that makes you, on one hand, have some insight, but I also think it gives you a bias, because we know that when we know people, we tend to be nicer to them.
Yeah, but that'll be interesting, because Greg Hughes had interesting insights too, where he met with Trump and he says he was surprised by how he'd remember specific things about his kids or his wife's name or whatever. So these are the insights we need. So we need you to commit that you'll come back at least one more time and
Tell
play
us
with
about
us.
these people.
Because Trump's visiting at the end of this month. This was the last thing we're going to discuss. He's coming to use the Utah ATM and get a bunch of cash.
As he should.
Any reason to think that there will be a public rally, or are we just going to be a fundraising Park City stop?
Is he going to do a press event? Because I hear that's important.
And can Heidi talk to him?
Can he do an exclusive one-on-one with Heidi since
Everybody
press
wants to meet
conversations
Trump,
are
right?
important?
Look,
I don't.
I
I'm
want
good.
to read.
I'm fine.
I want to.
Someone can have my spot.
Politicians.
Let me tell you something. I was at lunch yesterday, and somebody came up to us and said, "Why isn't Trump out on TV? Like, why isn't he coming to Utah? Why isn't he doing all these things?"
And you said, because we're a Republican state
And
that
I
he
said
takes
that
for
as-
granted.
Yep, exactly. And they were disappointed. And I think to the point, and again, I'm coming back to the blue-collar workers, the average Americans or Utahns, people find Trump fascinating. They want to meet him. They want to get to know him.
Not my people. Like, I don't want to meet him. I don't want to get to know
the
him.
majority
You
of
don't,
Utahns.
because like
I
even
have
people
no
I
interest in
dislike
him.
who've been president, I would
No.
love to sit down and like pick their brains.
That is true for almost everybody in my world because I'm a curious person who likes
Interesting.
people. I'm cool. Anyone can have my seat at any Trump thing.
Hey, let me come back to real quick to Vance. And I didn't get this out when we were talking about it. But J.D. Vance was also picked because he can bring the Rust Belt states along with him. And
No,
those
they
are
think
states
he
that
can.
we need.
So far, the polling is wah, wah
No,
on
I
him.
just looked at the polling yesterday.
No.
Donald Trump is up by 2 to 4 points in those 3 or 4 states.
I'm going to do a metrics of side votes with you.
Okay.
I mean,
can't
not really.
wait for this.
Opportunity.
See, now you've got to come back at least
Now
a
we're
couple
come back
times.
and tell you
Yes.
about our side
yeah,
bets.
Yeah. Well,
then-
I want it on. I want it printed. Record. I want a record of it so you don't weasel out of it.
Oh, I don't weasel out anything.
That's true. You do pay your bet.
I will
All right.
pay.
It'll be interesting. So how much poll do you have? Is there a possibility in the next few weeks they'll come up with like a Utah rally or
I'm
anything?
assuming you'll be there.
I'm going to be there. And, I
Because
think
you have
there's a chance.
$500,000 to get a picture with him, or because you're Speaker Schultz?
Both.
You'll never know.
Look,
He's
Check.
selling 6
check
cows.
and check.
here's what I think. I think if the Secret Service will let him do a rally
Oh
here
my
in Utah,
gosh!
I
You're
think
seriously telling me that Trump is dying, but the Secret Service won't let him? Oh, please. You're killing me.
the man just about lost his
You're
life to a bullet, not a piece of
killing
strapple.
me.
About
You're
lost his life to
killing
a
me.
bullet 3 weeks ago, or maybe it's 4 weeks now. I think they're a little on edge on
So
where
the
they're
Secret
doing
Service is
rallies.
calling the shots. So he can't do public events anymore because,
no,
but
no,
Kamala
no.
can figure it out.
Oh my hell!
But Trump, he's that precious.
I don't know if
flower.
this friendship's going to last.
I know it's not. I know Mike's
I know,
frustrated.
but I am interested to see how that shakes out because he is coming here.
That is going to be in the cards whether or not he does.
So
a
he's
rally
not going
or
to
whether
do
or not
public
he's-
in the great
venues-
state of Utah,
The
the
venues,
bastion of republicanism.
the venues play a decision on whether or not they will do.
He's doing a private
and so,
fundraiser
yeah, with you walk through.
in Park City at a bougie house.
in Park City at a bougie house with people bringing in money.
So did Kamala. Kamala just
No,
did
no,
it
I'm
the other
saying,
day.
and I know that's
Yeah.
what I'm saying. She was able to handle this. I'm just saying, if he wants to do a public event, the
He did
Secret
one in
Service can manage it.
2016, and I think the reason why he did it then is because there was the chance that Evan McMullen was going to pull off a win here in Utah. Because usually everyone ignores Utah, but I think it was that one year where it was like,
So I'm just poking
Do I
the bear
come?
here because if I were advising Trump, I would say, hell no, don't do a public. You do not stump with your base. You go get money from your base. So I am just being
There's-
difficult
but there-
because
again,
I
I'm
think
gonna-
he should get in, get out with as much money as possible if I'm giving him strategic advice.
I think there is a large portion of the population here in Utah that would love to feel part of the process.
Right, but he's already got
And I
their
think-
vote. Move along. Go get as many votes as you can. I'm just giving you free electoral
ooh,
advice
free
there.
Exoro group advice.
Trump,
Normally
just
she
move
charges
in,
for
move
this.
out.
All right.
Well,
Right? You don't think you should hang out here for very long. Move to Nevada. I mean, like, spend your time in places where you need to
that's
get
it.
the
He's
vote.
flying over Utah. It doesn't take that long to stop. Go do a fundraiser, and maybe you throw in a half an hour, 45-minute rally, and be done.
Because you got to drive down to I-80 at some point to get back to the airport. Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to see how it turns out. And no more poking bears. It's been a bad month for bears in Utah, too. You name
been
it.
a bad-
It's just
I
been a bad
know.
month for so many things. Honestly, I was so relieved that August came because I was just like, whew.
It was a rough.
It was a
was
rough,
busy.
rough month.
And it was hot.
I know. And I'm already not looking forward to the DNC. No offense to the DNC, but same with RNC.
dreading it.
CBS does this thing where we get done with it. They speak late, and then we have to have a whole hour of another program before we go on. So then I go to bed late, and I'm ornery. So anyhow, it happens for both RNC and DNC, but at least we get a few weeks in between them. So
I'm excited to watch the DNC. Believe that or not.
I'll
You're gonna
be
watch
in-
it?
I'm going
do you
to watch
think?
it.
I'll be
Yeah,
interested
I'll
to
watch
see
it.
too. The DNC, I think, has always done a better job putting on a good show on stage. I think the RNC learned
They're
from
more
it.
entertaining for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, they always have been. Don't
Yeah.
you think?
Oh,
think that's
Mike's
true?
phone's
Let me
ringing,
do
so we
that.
got to get out of here. So thank you so much for rehashing an entire month here. Hopefully we'll have Mr. Schultz back as we're trying to figure out how to recalibrate our lives without Greg Hughes here. You might be hearing some new voices. So thank you so much for listening.
Thanks
Thank you for
having me.
joining us. Thank you for putting up for each other. And we're back at 'em. Thanks for joining us.